Let's begin with, take a moment to say thank you. I know some of you have already started the breakfast. That was the intention, but I do want us to start with a moment of thanks. So, for the city of Houston and its rich heritage, expansive culture, deep diversity, and deliberate inclusivity, we are thankful. For Mayor Turner and our equity champions and advocates on City Council and County Commissioners Court, in the state legislature and beyond, we are thankful and offer you our encouragement and support to continue your good and necessary work. For each person in this room and all who proudly live in this world as Houstonians, we are thankful for you. For the meal we are about to eat, and for those that made it possible, and for those with whom we are about to share this meal with, we are thankful. Amen. Now, today is a great day. I am Shannon Buds. I am Director of the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities, which is Mayor Sylvester Turner's equity initiative to push forward on all of the good things that make Houston great. And while everyone in this room may be aware of data on inequity in Houston, we are gathered today because this is the first time it has been cataloged. It is also important that this work was funded by the private sector. One of Houston's most prominent corporate citizens, Shell USA Incorporated, invested in this work. And that underscores the importance of this work in this region and the impact it has on our collective prosperity. We all have the responsibility of working to make Houston more equitable so we can achieve the United States' ultimate aspirational goal of true equality. And today is the start of a new era in our city, in which we don't hide the work of equity, but instead lead with it, front and center. Angela Blackwell, founder of the equity think tank Policy Link, always says, equity is the super growth model. Today, you're going to have a super growth moment. That is what all of this is to help us all be encouraged to keep doing this incredible, forward-facing, innovative, transformative work. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Christina Jones, Vice President of HR Diversity and Inclusion at Shell USA Incorporated. Christina has worked for Shell for 18 years as an HR professional with a variety of experiences, and she has served in HR roles in Texas, California, and abroad in Oman and the Netherlands. Her experience has been in support of multiple Shell businesses, including supply and distribution, lubricants, manufacturing, upstream, non-operated joint ventures, and a host of other things. We are fortunate to have her here because she has contributed to a vast array of roles within the HR space as well. She is one of those folks leading on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in human resource management, both from Texas A&M University. And we thank you so much, Christina Jones, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Shannon. It's my pleasure to be here today. Ooh, you're much taller. Heels. Flats. It's my pleasure to be here today, and thanks for emceeing. I know that's not an easy job, and I will go under my time allotment because I know that's how that works. So, welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and special thanks to Mayor Turner for bringing us all together and helping us to see where Houston is today and where we can go in the future. As a Houstonian, I take great pride in Houston being one of the most diverse cities in the U.S. And professionally, Shell USA proudly calls Houston and Texas home for decades. And we know that Houston's population opens up a workforce of diverse perspectives that are going to be what we need to bring more and cleaner energy today and in the future. This Equity Indicators report is a first of its kind for Houston, and we at Shell are proud to have funded this study. We believe to uphold a city as diverse as Houston, differences should also become strengths. so that together we are all helping move Houston forward in efforts to close the opportunity gap. Creating opportunities for a diverse range of people is a collective effort. Many of you here in the room today, all of us working together to be able to strengthen our communities and ultimately strengthen the companies that like to call Houston home, much like Shell. We strive to support individuals and communities by providing jobs, bringing local businesses into our supply chain, promoting entrepreneurship, investing in education, and offering skills, trainings that we believe those in our community need. We understand everybody is on a journey, and this report's findings serves as indicators for the work that's been happening in the greater Houston area today and the work that can happen and is to come in the future. Our goal is to thrive in this city and to uplift others to thrive with us. Thank you again for everyone for coming today, and I look forward to the continued conversation on how we can continue to make progress together in Houston. So thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to bring to the podium a man who, of course, needs no introduction, Mayor Sylvester Turner.
Let me say good morning to everyone. And before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge the council member for District D. She's going to be catching a flight very soon, Council Member Carolyn Ellis-Shabazz. So I know she's heading to Atlanta for a funeral of a good friend of ours. So Council Member, thank you, and it's always good to be in your district. And of course, this is the district of destination, and we're in the new Sunnyside Multi-Service Center. So give it up to Councilman Carolyn Ellis-Shabazz. Good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning. All right. Well, look, let me just say I'm delighted to see everyone here today. I do want to acknowledge Shannon Buggs and for her leadership in this effort, for helping to pull all of this together, being the leading this effort. So please give it up to Shannon Buggs. The Director of Complete Communities. Christina, thank you so very, very much. I do want to certainly start off by acknowledging Shell on multiple fronts. It's good to see Christina. Dr. Frazier, good to have you here as well, and appreciate your support even before I became mayor, but certainly during being mayor. We happen to be members of the same church too, and the fraternity, so hey, on multiple levels. But last week, for example, we celebrated Shell Freedom Over Texas, so Shell was very instrumental in that. And I believe the best that we've had in the last 8 years, so let me thank Shell. And then, as Shannon has indicated, they have underwritten our Resilient Houston plan that came out in February of 2020, so I want to thank them for that as well. There are a number of council members who are here or will be coming through. If you are a council member with the City of Houston, just stand up so I can see you. Council Member Robinson, Council Member Tiffany Thomas, Council Member Carolyn Ellis-Shabazz. Let me thank you all. And you'll be hearing more from Council Member Tiffany Thomas a little bit later on. If you are an elected official, I think we have some state representatives who are here. Please stand up so I can see you. State Representative Reynolds is here. And Representative Reynolds is also chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, so thank you so very, very much. If you are a department head, a director for the City of Houston, let me ask you to stand as well. All my directors stand and remain standing. Janice Weaver, we have Director Kenneth Allen, we have Director Bynum, Mark Wilford, Carol Haddock, Mary Benton, Walter Hambrick, and I'm going to have some senior moments, Jesse Bounds, Nicole Irvin, Margaret Wallace Brown, Priya Zachariah, Tasha Takasha Francis. I should know her. She was one of my students in law school. And we have Dr. Rhea Lawson. Did I miss any? Where's Ted Irvin? Ted Irvin with HTV. Thank you all for being here. Please give it up to all the directors. And I also wanted to acknowledge someone who I look up to and someone who's just an inspiration in of himself, Larry Payne. Where's Larry? Thank you, Larry, so very, very much. Look, there are so many others, quite frankly. Each and every one of you represents special guests here today, VIP, so thank all of you for being present. Look, Houston is a very diverse city. And we often say we're the most diverse in the United States, which I think is true. Over 145 different languages that are spoken here. And we are diverse on so many levels. It's not just in terms of ethnicity or language or religion or sexual orientation. It's ideologies. It's, you name it. We are so highly diverse. And we are spread out over 660 square miles. So there's a lot within that. We are the largest, one of the largest cities geographically. So there's so much happening in our city. And we are the fourth largest city, and we continue to grow. But as we have grown, the Houston job market grew by 19% between 2008 and 2017. But our income inequality grew by 16% during the same time. And quite frankly, when you look at, if you are native, how many are native Houstonians in this room? Oh, a whole lot of native Houstonians in this room. And then for those of you who are native Houstonians, you can certainly say to those who are not native Houstonians, this city has evolved quite a bit over the last 25 years, quite frankly over the last 10 years, and we are so much more diverse today than we have ever been. But if you're also a native Houstonian and you have driven around all of this city, you do also see communities and neighborhoods that have in many ways remained the same. And if they've not remained the same, in some cases, they have gotten somewhat worse. Or they, in many cases, gentrification is taking place. If you are native Houstonian or you've been here 10 years or less, at the same time, you could go around our city, and you can also see in our city there are areas where there are food deserts, where there are not quality grocery stores. You'll have to drive outside of your communities, for example, to get to an H-E-B or to a Kroger's. And I don't say that based on what people have said to me. I grew up and still live in one of those neighborhoods. As the mayor of the city of Houston, as the mayor of the city, I have to drive outside of my neighborhood to get to an H-E-B. As the mayor of the city of Houston, when you start talking about financial institutions, you know, I have to drive outside of my community, for example, to go to a major bank. Now, what I will see in my community and in neighborhoods that look like that, you will see what I call check cashing institutions, where in order to cash your check, you're going to have to pay quite a bit for it. And in certain neighborhoods, there are energy deserts, or, for example, the heat index is much higher in some of those neighborhoods than are in others. And quite frankly, Margaret Wallace Brown provided me with a map the other day where when you look at certain neighborhoods, like Sunnyside, the one we are in, or on the northeast side, or in the northwest side, when you look at the heat map, it is concentrated in many of these communities that we have described as complete communities, or communities that have been underserved and under-resourced. And where you see certain development that's taking place that you would not find in other areas where there are deed restrictions or they're more affluent, you see this development that's occurring taking place in these communities. Now, that's not equity. that just furthers those disparities. Or even when it comes to health disparities. I can take you to a zip code, for example, out in Northeast, where the life expectancy is 20 years less than the neighboring zip code. That's not equity. Those are health disparities. And there are economic disparities, there are housing disparities, those things exist. And though I would love to stand before you and say that we live in a colorblind society, that's just not the reality when you take a look even in the city of Houston. And so we are highly diverse, but equity still very much eludes us. And quite frankly, it is something that cannot just be addressed under one administration. It has to be addressed over multiple generations, because the disparities that have occurred did not occur in 1 year time or 10 years or 20 years. They have occurred over an extended period of time. And in order to address them, you have to talk about equity. You have to talk about it in real terms. And you have to peel the layers over it, because it's a conversation that everyone needs to have in every facet of our life, in every aspect, even including the media itself. I do not leave them out, because they are vital players in all of this. So that's why we're having this conversation. That's why I cannot thank Shell enough for underwriting these equity indicators, because we need to have this conversation. And so let me just say that we came up with this, put it into place, 10 complete communities, making progress, but we are a long way from where we need to be. So I want to thank everyone, and I had a whole lot of notes here, but I went off script. And when you go off script, that's not a good thing. I got it down. So equity sits at the heart of Resilient Houston, the umbrella plan that shelters and elevates the Climate Action Plan, Complete Communities, and other city equity initiatives. Its fundamental premise is that when we build capacity and address inequity in our most vulnerable communities, we build capacity and resilience across our city and our region. Houston launched its Equity Indicators Project in response to Goal 12 in Resilient Houston, Advancing Equity and Inclusion for All. Houston is considered by many to be the land of opportunity, and in many ways it is. Unfortunately, that opportunity flows differently to some Houstonians based on their zip code and their race and ethnicity or their sexual orientation. One Complete Houston, Understanding Our Equity Challenges and Opportunities, outlines what we learned in the City of Houston's first ever Equity Indicator Study. It measures data in 63 topical areas. The data coalesces into a score called an equity indicator that, when compared with scores in another equity indicator, provides a picture of whether opportunities are equally available to all Houstonians. This report, funded by Shell USA Incorporated and developed by the City of Houston in collaboration with the Kinder Institute for Urban Research, uses methodology derived from the City University of New York's Institute for State and Local Governance. However, community input and feedback were important components of our Equity Indicators Project. The Planning Department, in partnership with the Office of Complete Communities and Resilience and Sustainability, the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability, convened community leaders to provide help to shape our city's definition of equity and how to best engage the larger community. We gathered input from the public through a survey available online and distributed at the city's community facilities. We met with representatives of city departments to enlist their help in identifying relevant data sets and to help us understand the scores for 21 and 2022. The consistent methodology from CUNY, coupled with the city's specific data, means that Houston's equity can be compared with other cities. Houston's overall equity score is 44.1 out of 100. delineating a dire need for improvements. Compared to other cities that have used the equity indicators methodology, our score is higher than Dallas' 2021 score of 38 and Tulsa's 2022 score of 42.63. However, Houston follows behind St. Louis' 2018 score of 45.57 and Pittsburgh 2018 score of 55. I want to caution everyone, equity scores are not pass or fail measurements of progress towards our goal of being a more equitable city. Equity is a lens through which we all can assess and adjust. City policies and procedures, business strategies, corporate environmental, social, and governance initiatives, philanthropic investment models, nonprofit missions, and a host of other efforts that impact Houstonians' opportunities and life circumstances. I give you an example. There are over 350 local neighborhood parks in our city, over 350. Now, some may ask about parks. People who have visited in our city, haven't been in our city long, may not know all the neighborhoods, and then when it comes to parks, they may say, oh, see, Houston has great parks, and we do. And so they'll focus on Memorial, or they'll focus on Discovery Green, a Levy Park, a Buffalo Bayou Park, a Herman Park. And those are great parks. Those are our signature parks, okay? But those 350 plus local neighborhood parks that are embedded in Sunnyside, or Third Ward, or the near North Side, or Acres Home, those are parks that also need a little love as well. And those are parks that need to be significantly enhanced. And those are parks that directly can transform that street, that community, that neighborhood. And so when I came into office, you know, we wanted to put a laser focus on those local neighborhood parks. Now, city's limited in its resources. I came up with what's called an initiative called 50-50, which I was asking 50 corporations, businesses, for example, to adopt 50 of these local neighborhood parks. Not to make incremental improvements, but to transform these parks for the better, so that when kids walk to those parks or bike to those parks, or the families go to their park, they too feel as though somebody has seen them, heard them, and is helping to transform those communities. We were not able to do all 50. The plan now, we will do 22 of them. 11 of them will be done before I leave office by the end of this year. But when we invest in those 350 local neighborhood parks, then we are creating equity throughout the city of Houston. And we are transforming lives and families. And people will feel that they're not like second-class citizens. And I say that because in the neighborhood in which I was born and reared, for the local neighborhood parks, for a baseball field, we got the pillowcases. You get you a shovel, you put the dirt in the pillowcases, and then you create your home base. And you go and create first base, and you go and create second base and third. And then you just run around as many times as you can to create the trail. And that established the baseball field for those of us in the fofo. And then when the city created the West Little York Park, they created a park in name, but no quality facilities. So who took over those parks? The folk that you just don't want to hang around. And so the kids and other families stayed away, but that criminal element took over. And then when I came through as a state representative, decided that just doesn't work anymore. So we raised the money, not the city. We raised the money, Janice Weaver, to transform that park, and then built baseball fields, put the lighting in, put the trails around it, put all of the amenities that you would like to see in any park, in any neighborhood. And then what then happens? Then the major league comes down. They take a look at what we had done, and decided, oh, this fits into our urban youth baseball academy. And from that, the Astros stepped in. And now it's the Major League Astros Youth Academy at the Sylvester Turner Park, not because the city put the money in, but because we raised that money. And then what happens? The other night, Saturday night, the Astros' #1 pick, Bryce Matthews, played at that academy in Acres Home, now playing Major League Baseball with the Houston Astros. When you build equity, then you give all of our children the opportunity to participate, to play, to be in the game, to elevate, because you can have talent, but if you don't have equity, you simply have children walking around with talent and no opportunity. That's what we are trying to create. And the only way you can get there is when you have this conversation. Because people need to see that equity still doesn't exist in our city at the level that it should. Lastly, and I'll be done, we are building this innovation hub. I want to thank Rice for the ion. It is making a huge difference on South Main. I want to thank the companies that invested in TXRX in Houston. It started off at 10 to 12,000 square feet. It's now 300,000 square feet and a major innovation hub. I want to thank people who invested in the spaceport, now one of the 10 in the country, and the Cannon in West Houston. But when you look at the Northeast and Northwest, you don't see that innovation hub. And so we've taken, for example, like Methuen Elementary School that was abandoned by Aldine, leased it to us for $1 for 30 years. And now the goal is to turn that into an innovation hub, connected to the ION and TXRX and the Space Center, but right there in the community, in the neighborhood. Now we're seeking people to come and invest in that. But sometimes people have to see in order to give. On the same level that they give every place else. Well, let me tell you, all neighborhoods have value. And all neighborhoods have promise. And all kids across our city can succeed if we give them an opportunity. In 6 months, I'll no longer be mayor. But it doesn't mean that things should stop or the investment should not continue. I am mayor today because there was a senior citizen who, after every church service, would find me and place a $5 bill in my hand and would say to me, "Little brother Turner, Sister Evelina Muldrew doesn't have much, but what I have, I'm going to share with you. So take what I give you, and I'm going to pray for you, and you run this race for Sister Evelina Muldrew." It's because of her belief and faith in me that I'm now the mayor. I come out of that neighborhood. But I'm the mayor today because somebody decided to invest in me. As mayor of the city of Houston, as I prepare to exit from the office, it is important for this city to invest in neighborhoods and people that have been overlooked far too long. And it's not about the media trying to pull people down who are trying to make a difference. And it's not about businesses and corporations going around them And it's not about allowing development to take place in these communities where you wouldn't put it anyplace else. It's about lifting people up and giving them the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their language, regardless of their faith, regardless of where they look, regardless of their social economic status, giving them an opportunity to benefit. 44 on the equity indicator scale should not be representative of our city. It should not. And so, as we advance, it's important that we do everything we can to lift them up. I took way too long. I took too long. But let me just say this. I took the time because there are kids in our city that are depending on us. You want a safe city? You invest in these neighborhoods. You want to be able to sleep at night, not worry about somebody breaking in your home? Invest in these communities. If you want a better city, then it's important that we make sure that equity is across the board. And you cannot be colorblind when there are intentional deficiencies. Something doesn't add up at all. You don't want affirmative action? Then eliminate the deficiencies. But as long as you have the deficiencies, then you're going to have to do something to make the adjustments. You cannot have it both ways. It does not work. So again, I cannot thank Shell enough for the investments that you have made in this equity indicator study, because quite frankly, we all need to hear it and see it, whether we like what the score says or not. You may not like 44. And if you don't like it, then you need to improve it. Okay, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Mayor Turner, for giving us the call to action, the charge to continue to do the work. There was one group of people that he didn't ask to stand up that we as a city are investing in to be our champions of equity for the future. So could all of our Higher Houston Youth interns also stand up so that you can be recognized? These students represent the best of Houston. Mayor Turner has challenged us over and over again in his administration to increase the number of students who have opportunities in this city for summer employment and to give them a baseline of work experience that helps them to achieve opportunities that were limited to him and to so many others. It is our work that affirmatively says to all of our youth, you have a place here in this city and we will help you to grow. So we do thank Mayor Turner for all that he does. Now we will hear from Dan Potter, the Senior Director of Research at the Kinder Institute of Urban Research at Rice University. Dan has been working with us on this Equity Indicators report and all of the work, and there's been several folks who have been doing this work, and he has a presentation to go further into how we got to that score of 44%. Thank you.
All right. Normally, I'm the one who is pretty fiery during my speeches, but I will not try to match that energy. Thank you so much, Mayor Turner, for that call to action, and thank you, Shannon, for this opportunity to share our results, and thank you all for being here this morning and showing with your feet that this is a topic that matters and that this is something that we as a city need to be paying attention to here. And so, as Mayor Turner said, our score, 44.1. there are a lot of numbers that go into the background of it, and I am going to talk through some of those numbers today. Don't necessarily get hung up on the numbers. Please keep hearing the call to action. Recognize that these numbers aren't going to tell you what to do, but they may give you a roadmap on where you need to be looking. And so with that in mind, let's get into this report. So the report is composed of 7 broad themes. Those 7 broad themes contain 21 topics within them, and then within each of those topics, there are 3 indicators. And so if you pick up the report and you thumb through it, you will find yourself looking at 63 total indicators. These indicators are oftentimes comparing across our race and ethnic groups. Again, quite the diverse city that we have here. And so it is allowing for us to look and see who has and who has not. And how do we call attention to that? And that is what we use to come up with our indicator score at the end of the day. And so one thing for us to keep in mind with this is to recognize that we are not talking, when we are talking about a disparity, when we are talking about equity, when we are talking about equality, one of the things that we've got to be sure that we are centering in this conversation is the issue of quality. There is a very easy way to close equity gaps, is to make everything awful. That's not what we're after. And so again, when we have this call to action, when we are making these efforts towards wanting to improve equity, and when we look at indicators, by the way, we're going to see indicators that we as a city can go, wow, look, there is an absence of disparity. There's equity in that space, in that indicator. Please ask yourself the question, is there quality? Is there quality? So we have Houston currently at 44.1. Within that framework, and that is our overall score. And so we can break that score down by our 7 different themes. And these themes are ordered from the theme in which we had the highest score. And again, a higher score indicating more equity, more parity in where we are as a city. Lower scores indicating where we have more gaps, where we have more disparities. And so we have our highest score was within infrastructure. And again, this should clue us in to challenge ourselves with this question of equity and quality. And so when we have infrastructure, we have a score for our public transportation of 85.3, connectivity and mobility, things like access to cars, things like roadways, 63. When we talk about green and resilient infrastructure, we're talking about 85. Now, there's multiple scores that are behind these, but one of the things we want to keep in mind has to do with what are those scores pointing to. One of the scores that we have the highest on is drainage, is our drainage system. We have a 98. A 98, that's practically pure parity. Why is that? Because 40% of our city's drainage is failing. It is ranked as a failing conditions, right? And so do we look at that parity, do we look at that equity and say, congratulations, Houston, or even in that success, recognize there's rooms for improvement? And so, again, within our infrastructure space, challenging ourselves to not be satisfied with the 85, but look behind it and look for where we can continue to grow and succeed more as a city. Next, we have environmental and climate risk. And again, this is our mixed bag. For pollution, 56. Disaster risks, 46.3. Temperature resilience, 66. Why is pollution a 56? Well, that is because our air quality is worse than 80% of the rest of the country. We are exposed to more cancer air toxins than 88% of the rest of the country. This is not something to pat ourselves on the back for parity, for equity, but to challenge ourselves, to hold Houston, to hold ourselves to a higher standard, to improve all of our air quality. Yes, we can talk about there being a level of equity. Let's challenge ourselves on this question of quality as well. Access and inclusion is another theme. And here we start to see where some of our disparities show themselves. Representation, score of 24. Suggesting while we have quite a diverse leadership in and around this area, not all of our community members see themselves in that representation. Community amenities. Again, here's where our parks and our green space is such a wonderful asset for this area. But when we look behind the scenes, maybe I've got that park that's a half a mile away. I've broken out into a gym sweat walking 100 yards from my car today. That half a mile away park doesn't quite give us the access that we're talking about. In addition to that, it doesn't tell you about the quality of that park. Again, hearing this story this morning from Mayor Turner about the transformation of parks that can be brought upon, again, it's that challenge of how do you not just say, well, you've got a green space, isn't that enough? It's a quality green space. It's a space that's opening up opportunities to that neighborhood. Quality of life assets, 46.3. And so now we're going to, these are perhaps the areas where we can look around and go, okay, Houston, aspects of success, levels and degrees of equity success. We're now going to talk through some of the themes where some of our scores came back and really do put us front and center of having to both grapple with this question of equity and this question of quality. Housing is the first one we can look at here. With housing, home ownership and affordability, a 46. Housing quality, 24.7. Talking about housing risk, where are people finding themselves in the way of Mother Nature, 53.3. This points to some of the large gaps in home ownership between people of color and white residents here in the Houston area. This question of housing quality talks about the way in which our median renter property here in Houston is over 38 years old at this point. We have challenges that are not in our housing stock that are not being equally experienced. Next, we have economic opportunity. And again, one of the things to also keep in mind as we're looking through here, these are all interconnected in some ways. And some of these things you can think of as the catalyst, and some of these perhaps as outcomes. And here I want to point to a catalyst. If you want to talk about ways of transforming the city, if you want to talk about ways in which investing, if I'm looking at that roadmap towards equity and I want to know where can I have the biggest bang for my buck, perhaps here is where we need to start. When we look at our economic opportunity and we see our employment score of 21, we see educational attainment of 47 score, income and poverty of 35. This is screening out that there are different lived experiences here in Houston, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm just giving you a number that points to your reality. I'm just giving you an opportunity to see the data speak for your lived experiences in this regards. We can do more in this regard. Another one of these things that if I don't have it, there's a lot of other things that aren't going to come out of it, that aren't going to come out of me, has to do with health. If I'm not well, whether that be a physical, whether that be a mental, if I am not well, I am not going to be able to do. And so when we look at things like access to health care, we talked about food deserts earlier today. There are healthcare deserts in our city. There is not a doctor in sight. And so what does that mean for a community? What is that doing? What is that signaling to that community about the value of their health? When we talk about child and maternal health, there is a crisis right now when it comes to maternal health in our area. We have rates of maternal mortality that parallel that of a third world country. We are not a third world country, and yet somehow we look around and we are willing to tolerate that. And let's just be perfectly clear. I'm not talking about every expecting mother facing this risk. We are talking about in particular around black expecting mothers. That's the number that jumps off the chart. That's the number you got to do something about, and yet that seems to be the number that we just hush, brush under the rug and move on. We have to challenge ourselves, recognize this inequity, do something about it. And then finally, we can look at public safety. When we talk about public safety, once again, experiencing two different Houstons here. When you talk about victimization, when you talk about arrests and the use of force by law, when you look at law enforcement and response times, on the one hand, you can stand up and you can show that that type of response time is quite equitable. But when you start looking at other aspects of how we experience our day-to-day lives and how we feel safe or we feel the absence of safety, our numbers tell us the fact that there are two different types of Houstons that people are oftentimes experiencing. And so we can call out particular areas of concern to get us more attuned to what is it we are talking about. And so when we're talking about these areas of concern, we're talking about certain indicators that have a score of less than 20. And again, a score closer to 1 indicates quite a large extreme, almost the most inequality you could possibly think of. A score of 100 indicates parity. And so when we're talking about a score of less than 20, we're talking about a score where you see quite a lot of inequality. And we see that inequality when it comes to EPA penalties. We see that inequality when we have the comment made earlier about those the banking deserts, unbanked, underbanked, check cashing facilities, the various different payday loans, title loan companies. If these are your financial institutions, you do not have financial institutions. And yet that's what so many of our neighborhoods are forced to rely on because of where our banks are putting the brick and mortars. When you talk about diversity within our law enforcement, whether that be the fire department and first responders or HPD, you have diversity in ways that when you stand it up against other cities is actually quite impressive, but those other cities aren't Houston. Those other cities don't have the beautiful diversity that we have here. And that diversity is not reflected in our law enforcement. Low-value housing stock. These are homes that are valued at less than $100,000. These are concentrated in your East Houston, in your Northeast Houston, spaces in which, arguably, you still have affordability, but what is the quality of the homes that are affordable anymore? Business ownership. This is one of the lowest scores we see in the entire thing. Why is it that small businesses seem to be open only to certain residents and not others? That probably has something to do with your access to capital. How do we begin connecting some of these dots to both elevate and address certain shared challenges of our Houston area? Maternal health, I've already given you my rant on that one, so I will move past it, but just calling it out once more is something we have to pay attention to and notice. Mental health, whether, and just recognizing health in general, needing to make sure that we are taking care of things. Adult felonies, juvenile misdemeanors, traffic stops, each of these things on this list, while on the one hand, we might have a moment to go, well, what am I supposed to do about that? But that's the challenge. What is it that we as Houston can do? And whether that's a we private citizen we, whether that's a we philanthropic we, or whether that is a we public we. This is a challenge. This is a roadmap. This is an opportunity for us to look and see what are the things that we can begin addressing that are going to help elevate our city so that I'm not having to sit here and try to convince you that we're almost St. Louis because we're way better than St. Louis. Sorry for any native St. Louisians. But we don't need to stand ourselves up against other cities to feel good about ourselves. We can stand ourselves up against ourselves and figure out what is acceptable to us. What is it we want our city to be? And so, again, our challenge is, as we are having this conversation about equity, recognizing that there is an element of equality that has to go in that. But whether you are talking about equity, whether you are talking about equality, you cannot lose sight of the quality component to it. Because again, you can achieve equality through a race to the bottom. But I would challenge us to both chase quality while not losing sight of the equity that we are after along the way. And so that is the report. Those are the data points. I think it is incredibly important to emphasize that these data points are not the end. They are the beginning. They are intended to be a baseline with which we will be able to come back to and hold ourselves as a city accountable, hold ourselves as an area accountable. And it cannot be emphasized enough. There is not a light switch that any of us are flipping to turn this 44 into a 66 or a 77. These are decades, if not centuries-long inequities that are built into a structure, that are built into a system, and unless you are addressing that structure, and unless you are addressing that system, you're not going to move these numbers. You're going to put along Band-Aids that are going to push along this problem to the next generation. And so let's allow for this 44 to sit with us. Let's allow for that 44 to challenge us. And let's allow for it to motivate us to carry on to not just the next mayor, but the mayor after that and the one after that. And that is the way you will have sustained, systematic changes that will bring about the equitable Houston that we can have, that we can be. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Well, we can see that the legacy of Dr. Stephen Kleinberg at Kinder Institute is going to be well protected, and there will be an enthusiastic and energetic continuation of the work. Could you bring that slide back up, though, that showed the areas of concerns, please? I do want you all to note that everything that's on this list, the Turner administration has been addressing. everything that's on this list. The EPA penalties, we have One Clean Houston that's happening right now. Residents without bank accounts, that is also being addressed by the Houston Financial Empowerment Center program. The diversity in HFD and HPD, we've had more cadet classes in this administration than any other administration. And we make sure we recruit a diversity of candidates for that. The low value stock housing. We have worked hard to repair homes in order to make them better and get them weatherized and prepared for resilience. But we also have Mayor Turner's 3,000 single-family homes challenge. We've already met the challenge of building 7,000 new multifamily homes. So that is being addressed. Our Office of Business Opportunity has spent over $2 billion, I believe it is at this point, with minority-owned businesses. We've been addressing the health concerns, and in our COVID-19 response, the mayor set up the Health Equity Response Task Force to specifically address COVID-19 within communities that are socially vulnerable. The maternal mortality is work that the health department has been working on for a very long time. Traffic fatalities, we have Vision Zero that is actually happening to reduce the amount of traffic fatalities. Margaret? Eliminate. Thank you, Margaret Mullis Brown. Traffic fatalities by what year, Margaret? 2030. So we're getting this work done. And then we also have One Safe Houston that is addressing everything on that list of public safety concerns. It is not that equity is a new thing to us. We've been doing this work. And I have to have right now Margaret Wallace Brown and Priya Zachariah stand up because they are our partners in doing this work alongside us in the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities. And then there is also Takasha Francis, the Department of Neighborhoods, if she'll also stand up, and she has also been doing this work. Because these are the offices, the Planning and Development Department with the lead planners that work on our Complete Communities initiative, the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability, and the Department of Neighborhoods. These are frontline offices for where residents go when they have a problem, and they are the ones that help us identify those areas of concern and come up with solutions to solve them. So I just had to take that moment to tell you that this is not new. We're getting the work done. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to please introduce you to another person who does not need introduction, but I do need you to understand exactly why it was so important to Mayor Turner and all of us to have Council Member Tiffany Thomas be our moderator for today. As Houston City Council Member for District D, I know, and the D for Deshelle, and I so apologize that and you know, it's so good that Councilmember Evans Shabazz has gone on to her airplane so that she did not get that. We're going to eliminate that from the tape. But anyway, District F, she has helped revitalize neighborhoods and partnered with corporations and nonprofits to solve community issues and has inspired future generations of civic leaders to get involved. Councilmember Thomas is a product of the local school system and a lifelong public servant representing Houston's most diverse part of town. She, like Mayor Turner, lives in a complete community, grew up in a complete community, as well as I did. Fort Bend, Houston for me, A-Leaf for her. After serving a term as A-Leaf ISD trustee, position 7, she was elected to Houston City Council in 2019 as the first Black woman and person under 40 to serve in this role. She proudly serves A-Leaf, West Chase, Tanglewild, Briar Meadow, Westmount, and the historic Piney Point communities. As chair of Housing and Community Affairs for the city, Councilmember Thomas oversees priorities related to housing, veteran affairs, homelessness, and solid waste. She remains focused on improving the lives of Houstonians by making a lasting impact on the quality of life for all of its residents. Councilmember Thomas, if you'll please join us, as well as our directors from the Mayor's offices, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, Nicole Irvin, Houston Public Works Director, Carol Haddock, and Parks and Recreation Director, Kenneth Allen. And while they get themselves seated, Councilmember Thomas, I did want to acknowledge that our major champion of this work alongside Mayor Turner has been and continues to be Chief of Staff Marvelette Hunter. Thank you so much for being here, Chief of Staff.
Good morning, everyone. So it's hard to come behind Mayor Turner and then also and Potter. That was very tough, but I'm gonna see if I can hold my weight this morning. Before I get started, and thank you so much for reading my bio, I just want to share with all of you in this room that I don't just come to this work as a council member, but I come to this work as a scholar and a practitioner, as an assistant professor of community development at Prairie View A&M University. Prairie View is the only historically black college with the academic community development program and the only institution in Texas with this program, noted as one of the oldest in the nation. So I come to this work and this conversation with this beyond passion but expertise. And I want to share with you what the data and what the research shows. And this is a personal point of privilege to acknowledge the work of Mayor Turner. So what the data shows, particularly for you as black mayors, that black mayors in our country lead with a community development lens. They center communities in their investments, with their finances, resources, and putting the people that are impacted the most at the heart of that work. And it is evident in Mayor Turner's administration. I believe that once, generations from now, decades from now, case studies will be done on what you led, what you envisioned, what you've implemented, and people will speak to the benefits of what they've benefited from because of decisions that you've made. A couple of decisions that have been made most recently, and I know Director Bynum left, the Director of the Housing and Community Affairs Development Department, but particularly to housing, and I know we're going to speak to some other areas. But at the 7,200 units that were mentioned, but also most recently at the city's budget, allocating an additional $20 million to local drainage projects to address communities that have historically been divested from. When a hurricane comes, they are most impacted, and that was so significant. And we may not see the benefits of that today, but in the next 10 years, people will say that a hurricane came through my neighborhood, and I was able to keep my home. I was able to maintain my property because of the drainage, the infrastructure that's happening. I'm sure Director Haddock will speak to that. So I just want to acknowledge you and just give him applause for that work. It is not easy to lead with an equity lens. It's not popular, and oftentimes in the dominant culture, language can be adopted, but the principles are removed. And so equity can become a talking point, and it's something that becomes hip and trendy, but we forget the work that it's required to do and move forward. So I want to go ahead and let's get started. That was my little monologue for you. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to the work. So I have the pleasure of working with some of the best directors in the city, and I'm not biased, and I think this is something that is very accurate. Many people within the mayor's administration and throughout the halls of City Hall, whatever building they're in, they're working tirelessly to make sure that people like you and me and my father and people all across the city have access to what is due to them. To what they ultimately deserve at the base level. So I'm really honored to moderate this conversation. I want to introduce Carol Haddock. She's the director of the Houston Public Works, the largest American Public Works associated accredited agency in the nation. She leads nearly 4,200 employees in transforming the culture and operations of the department, which has an annual operating budget of $2.7 billion and an annual capital budget of over $1 billion. Go ahead and acknowledge her. Y'all better clap, because when your drains need work, you got to get to her, so y'all better give her all of the applause, okay? Next, I want to introduce Director Nicole Irvin. Last year, she was appointed by the mayor to lead his Office of Cultural Affairs, where she serves as the Chief Cultural Policy Advisor to the mayor. She's responsible for implementing the city's arts and cultural plan and advocating for Houston's creative community. Let's go ahead and acknowledge her. She does a phenomenal job. Last and definitely not least, Director Kenneth Allen. He was appointed as Director of the Houston Parks and Recreation Department in 2021 by Mayor Turner, and he comes with 36 years of professional experience in the park and recreation field. having worked in the Parks Department for over 28 years with the last 11, I don't have my notes, but with the last 11, he was doing a good job, okay? Go ahead. I'm sure. So I want to go ahead and get started, and I teach Introduction Community Development at Prairie View, so I'm going to open this panel discussion with the one question I offer to all of my students. How much does it cost to invest in a neighborhood before that neighborhood reaches its tipping point and starts to generate wealth and equity on its own? How much? That's not a question you're going to answer today because my students never get it. They never get to answer that. But that's something I want you to ponder when they're talking about their areas. How much is the commitment we must make to our infrastructure, right? We can't talk about housing before we make sure that the drains are available and that they're all working together. We can't talk about an economy without making sure our artists, our creative community has a space in that and the things that we boast about in our city are sustained. We can't talk about investing in neighborhoods without talking about quality of life and how important our parks to us. So our parks are to our city. So I want to open with that question and then to you to ponder on how much does it take before a neighborhood starts to regenerate on its own. And then I want to open up with some questions. And Director Haddock, I want to start with you. You know, it is known that Houston we've had 7 federally declared disasters. And so Mayor Turner, not only has he been turning the ship on equity, but he's also been making sure that we can stay in place and that we can replace the units of housing that was lost, that we can make sure that simple drainage projects happen, capital improvement projects. So with you, when you hear the word equity, can you speak directly to some of the directions you've taken as director in Houston Public Works in terms of strategies and some of the results that have come from that?
So, good, this is on. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of being sitting on the stage and chatting with you this morning. It is a journey. I will tell you that every day in this job I learn something new. And what I know today is very different than what I knew 5 years ago, particularly in light of how we begin to even just talk about some of these topics. And begin to understand the legacy of what we at Houston Public Works, what we at the City of Houston, at the state, at the federal level, have done policy-wise that has resulted in where we are today. Because our investments match our policy. Yep. And they historically have done that. So when you ask on what we've done, first off, I want to acknowledge Dr. Potter and say thanks for bursting my bubble. I'm excited about that story, but reminding us that that equity in a not good quality infrastructure is not the right answer. Right. Our purpose at Houston Public Works is together we create a strong foundation for Houston to thrive. And it is aspirational, but it is also deliberate. We recognize that we are not yet that strong foundation. We're responsible for the infrastructure, for the things that Houstonians, our community depend on every single day. Our water, our wastewater, our streets, our storm drainage, and the permitting of those structures that we live, work, and play in and around, making sure that they're safe for their purposes. And so when you ask me what it is that we've done, I will say that over the last 5 years, I've continued to be challenged on a daily basis, and I will use the roadside ditches as the example. It was not too long ago, and unfortunately I will say it was not too long ago, it wasn't 5 years ago, that I was in the mayor's office and I made the comment, I feel like you're holding me accountable for things that are on the ground from before I was in this position, from before I was in this career, from before I was on this earth. And the response I got was, I am. And that took me back a little bit. I was like, what? Yeah. And the reason I say that is the roadside ditches is a perfect example of that. The roadside ditches in and of themselves are not bad. They're not inferior infrastructure by themselves. In fact, many areas of town, we embrace and love, and they filter stormwater, they do many good things for the community. But where roadside ditches aren't good is when they prevent us from having adequate sidewalks and transportation infrastructure, and when they prevent us because they're too deep, and they put a burden on the community for maintaining those ditches that is not, you know, I mow out to the edge of, well, actually I don't, I used to, I mow out to the edge of my curb, but it's a flat area. And so those roadside ditches actually do create inequities in how we put burdens on the community. And so when we had this conversation, and Mayor Turner recently pushed back on us and said, why shouldn't we do these things? And I'll be honest with you, our department's like, well, we should, but we haven't had the funding. And so the question becomes, how do we get creative? How do we find these different things? And in this case, he came to us and said, I'm willing to take some of the general fund surplus, and you need to match it. Yeah. And so we took some of our funding and agreed to match that to do a catch-up. And then to transfer that relationship with the community such that we are taking back on some of those responsibilities that had through cut budgets and through, you know, we pulled those off the table. And that was not the right answer. And so we are one step at a time tackling each of those issues and taking them forward. But I will tell you, if we hadn't been challenged with that question, I'm not sure my department would have, on its own, stood up and done that. And so my challenge is, how do we look at every single thing we're responsible for and not need a Mayor Turner to ask me the question? How do we look at each one of those things and say, how do we find these where we have inequitable outcomes because of our long-term practices and policies? And how do we right that ship? And not need, I love Mayor Turner, but not need him sitting there to challenge us to do the right thing.